Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Gail Burke. And we have as our guest this evening, Christian E. Weller, professor at the Graduate School of the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and also a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Welcome, Chris. We're glad to have you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, George and Gail.
Thank you for coming.
As we are recording the show, the rumors are running loose that our local Congressman, Seth Moulton, is preparing a video, most likely to announce his candidacy for the presidency. And it's getting to be quite a parade. And what really makes it interesting is every one of them has got the similar modus operandi, if you will, of what can I offer for free? And the question is, how do we pay for all this stuff for free? And that's where the question comes to you. How are we going to pay for this?
Well, the first point is there's nothing for free. In economics, we eventually have to pay for it. So if the government spends money, we have to raise taxes, or we collect taxes in the future if we run a deficit and we incur more debt. So the question then is, if we spent money today and we finance it for deficits, which we can, what will it do to economic growth? Will it boost economic growth? And if it does, then it will become a lot easier to repay that debt. In that context, what we're looking for in the current sort of burgeoning presidential campaigns is the series of proposals that address the known challenges for the country. They are largely, we have a failing infrastructure. If you live in the North Shore of Boston, you're probably familiar with the potholes along Route 1. That would be sort of one example, but think about sort of the bridges and everything that needs to be fixed. The other part is we need to invest more money in education to remain competitive, to generate the next generation of thought leaders and competitive workers. And the other part is we do need to spend more money on fixing relatively quickly the excessive income inequality we have. We have a massive income inequality that has been growing since the 1980s, has been very high the last 10, 15 years. And what that means is we don't have enough people to buying the stuff that we're making. And we have a middle class in this country that is struggling, that is worried about its future, is not saving enough for its own future. And we need to fix that. Again, if we fix the infrastructure, education, and income inequality, the evidence, all of the economic evidence suggests we will have faster growth that will make it easier to repay the deficits that we may incur to fix those problems.
Yeah. Well, with all due respect, Chris, when you talk about pouring more money into education, we keep pouring more money into education, and it keeps getting worse. It's not the amount of money, it's how the money is spent. We have a failing education system, and we have had it for years. And combine that with the Common Core, which was put into the schools about 10 years ago, and is failing terribly. It's not the money.
Well, there is a number of, you raise an important point. Our education system is very unevenly distributed. We have parts that do it very well. Massachusetts has a very good K-12 system.
As compared to what?
Internationally, nationally and internationally, a lot of our high school students do very well. Now, other countries have the same problem. The problem is we have greater income inequality, and we have greater inequality in the education system because our education is tied so directly to local conditions, and the local conditions are so unevenly distributed. We have incredible residential segregation by income, by race, by other factors, and that makes it much harder to sort of equalize educational access. But you raise an important point. Part of it is we always have to spend more money in education because the needs of what our kids need to learn are also increasing all the time because the world around us is changing, the technology. The problems we need to solve, such as climate change and others, do require us to sort of have education system that always needs to adapt to that. That requires us spending more money on education. But as you pointed out, it's a question, and this is sort of often a debate over research. Where do we spend the money the most effectively? There's a debate. Should we spend a lot of money on teaching salaries? That seems to be an important point. We need to attract more people into the teaching profession. Massachusetts probably pays its teachers relatively decently or okay enough to attract teachers, but you look at other states where you have major teacher strikes where teachers can't make ends meet, and there aren't enough people going into the teaching profession. Other ways where we can put more money in is shrinking class sizes. We do know that matters. The next part is, and that goes back to my point on infrastructure, and that is we do need to fix a lot of schools. Now, we have lots of new school buildings in Beverly, but you look around the state, you look around the country.
But new school buildings doesn't mean much of anything if you still have mediocre or worse, poor teaching, poor curriculum. It depends on what's in the curriculum. We may be spending more money in the schools. The children do not know anything about how the government works. They don't know who their representatives are. They know nothing about the Constitution. And this has been going on for years. Now, with the advent of Common Core, that is getting worse. So now we have 10 years of Common Core. So the children who started at kindergarten or grade 1 are now in high school. The kids that were not affected that much by it have graduated. But as they get older and they graduate, they go into college, they have to take remedial courses. And that is in Massachusetts as well.
Again, we have lots of inequality in our education system. We need to fix that. But let me go back to the school infrastructure system. Those are actually relatively low-hanging fruit. Not building new schools. I mean, we often, because that takes a long time, but think about Massachusetts. Where we could spend money is, for instance, fixing heating systems to make sure our students aren't in cold classrooms. Further south, you want to spend more money on air conditioning so that during the...
Well, that's called long-range planning, which
the
schools are not famous for.
But that stuff, when it comes to school infrastructure, fixing your heating, fixing your air conditioning, fixing the infrastructure, windows and stuff like that, that is stuff where the federal government can actually spend some money and help out the states.
The problem I have with a lot of these infrastructure kinds of problems that we're facing is that, yeah, you can go fix them, but how do they change the economy? The classic example is you got a bridge that's in sad shape across some river, and you decide, okay, we'll take the bridge down, put a new one in there. Is the traffic over the bridge going to increase? Are the businesses on either side of the river going to increase because of the bridge? The connection that I have trouble making is between, yeah, we can fix some serious problems. You look at China or Japan, and they have spent an awful lot of money on infrastructure, have gorgeous cities, and at the same time, it's debatable whether this infrastructure really has produced anything towards the GDP other than we spend a bunch of money and now we owe some money.
When it comes to infrastructure spending, there's two effects on the economy. The first one is when you spend money on infrastructure, you're hiring more people in construction, manufacturing. So that boosts gross domestic product, at least in the short run. Infrastructure spending has a very long effect on the economy. So you won't see it tomorrow, but because it takes some time to actually plan for it, spend it, fix it. But it pays off over 15 to 25 years.
Oh, yeah, I totally believe that Eisenhower's plan for the highway system that he slipped through because we're going to go to war and we need to move the troops around, but that's another story. But that national highway system has been worth its weight in gold because it connected a lot of cities that were marginally connected, and it got a lot of things going. But the net result is, okay, now you've got a factory out in West Oshkosh or someplace else, and you can get a truck that can get there and back very conveniently. Then all of a sudden, the business that was going on in West Oshkosh got shipped overseas, got replaced by robots. What are we going to do with infrastructure that's going to bring that back?
So when we think about infrastructure, we need to think relatively broadly, not just simply like, okay, well, do we fix some roads? Now, there are some low-hanging fruits like fixing the potholes, making sure that roads like Route 1 or others aren't in bad shape, that businesses don't have to wait, that just-in-time delivery of supplies works. The other parts we can think of infrastructure investment is actually fixing school buildings. The other part is bringing broadband to Oshkosh. To make sure that workers who have skills, who have ideas, who could work remotely, who have communities, who have a house, who have the skills, are actually connected to their potential employers. I mean, more and more of us are working remotely. And the issue here is often in rural areas in particular, you don't have the broadband capacity to connect people reliably to the markets where they could work. So somebody loses a job in Oshkosh or even Western Mass, they then either face the problem that there aren't any jobs there, and then they have to move, or because that becomes a lot of that sort of has a lot of follow-on effects. Because if a factory in Western Mass closes, the home values go down and makes it much harder to move. So bringing infrastructure, not just simply making it easier for trucks to deliver things, but also for people to connect to the rest of the labor market through broadband, through a computer. That's infrastructure.
Well, that gets me back to the next part of the game. Is what we're talking with Gail about the quality of this education we're trying to improve. Because you lose a job in a factory where you worked on an assembly line, and all of a sudden we're now saying, okay, now you've got 5G connection and you can get on your computer and do what? This is the training episode that I don't see being discussed very sincerely. Everything right now is supposed to be STEM.
Okay.
And yet, we don't have a STEM certified teacher in the city of Beverly. And I just, for the heck of it, went online and said, okay, I'm looking for a job as a STEM teacher. Nobody is interested in hiring STEM teachers within 500 miles. So we talk about this thing, and what I'm concerned about is how do we make these good ideas actually happen?
Well, there's a multiple issues you raised. When we think about sort of where the problems are with somebody who loses a job, be that in Beverly, be that further out in more rural areas, and when we talk about training, the first thing is we have to realize that most people do have a lot of training and skills because, let's say, they worked in a factory, they worked in construction for 15, 20 years. They often have also ideas of how to contribute in other parts of the economy. So telling them like, now you need to be retrained to be a STEM teacher or a computer coder is not all that useful. In some cases that might be interesting. We do know that that training can work even at very old ages. But we need to sort of make sure that the training is appropriate, that people can access it, that it is sort of culturally sensitive. That is like if somebody may not be fluent in English, but they're fluent in Spanish or Chinese or some other language, for instance, that the training is offered in those languages, and then that we also make sure that somebody doesn't have to leave their hometown in order to have access to decent jobs. And there's lots of stuff we can do, and there's lots of examples. They have been around for 15, 20 years. The one thing that really doesn't work is to go into a town that loses lots of jobs and say, like, you're all auto workers and we're now going to make you coders for Microsoft or something like that. And here is an online course, and if you don't take it, you won't qualify for assistance. Like, people do have skills, and we do need to recognize that those skills exist, and we need to make sure that we tap into those resources, because if we don't, we'd lose a lot of human capital.
Well, that gets to be one of the valid reasons, I think, for government getting involved in the economy of how do we recognize that this town that used to make bearings for Ford trucks or something like that now needs to do something different. And what kind of a system do we have in the government right now that can go in there and say, okay, all you guys that were making bearings before, these are some options you can consider, or what would you like to do? Do we have anything in the government that does that?
Now, are you talking about the federal government?
Yeah.
The state government?
Federal government, yeah.
The federal government. How can the federal government from way over here in D.C. determine what's going on, say, in Massachusetts, California? They don't have the ability to do that.
Well, I would argue that even like probably the government in Boston doesn't necessarily have
You're
the capacity.
absolutely right.
And we are a relatively small state. If
That's
you think
right.
larger states like New York or California, generally, I would say, I mean, there are mechanisms by which the federal government does sort of help out. It generally comes through sort of assistance programs. So if you can determine that a factory moved due to trade, meaning it moved to Mexico or China or somewhere else, the workers affected by that can qualify for some trade assistance and they qualify for some training. They then can determine what they're going to use that money for. We also have a lifelong learning credit in the tax code that people can apply throughout their careers to gain skills either at the local community college or increasingly online and stuff like that. The challenge is to do more in that, to give people who have skills. I mean, the third part, I should say, is a number of states have used the unemployment system, unemployment insurance system, so to incentivize people to start, for instance, their own business. So if you're laid off, you have an idea, I'm a carpenter, I want to teach an online course, for instance, on people do make apparently a lot of money on teaching YouTube videos on how to do things.
Yeah.
And so if you want to develop that because you have skills and you want to develop a business model around that, you can use some of your unemployment insurance benefits to start up your own business. Not in all states. I think it's only 12 states that do it. It's not particularly widely known and it's not very large. That kind of stuff tends to work because it taps into the skills that people have. But again, there needs to be an infrastructure that backs it up. So like if you are in the middle of, don't want to say necessarily nowhere, but out in a more rural area, you don't want to use AOL dial-up to upload a YouTube video for 45 minutes on how to do carpentry.
Yeah.
You do need broadband. You need high-speed internet.
Well, you need teachers to to teach you how to do carpentry,
Well, no, let's say like
or
you
plumbing.
if you worked as a carpenter in construction or you worked in an auto like you're a mechanic in an auto company, you're a skilled worker. You have been trained for almost a decade to get to the master level. So you have lots of skills. You just and there are people who want to learn from you. And you know you can bring these skills to a marketplace, just not in your local community. You just need to bring it to a broader audience. Or there's lots of business ideas that people have, and often are many successful. But the problem is, if you're in a town of 5,000 people, there aren't that many business opportunities locally. You need to bring that to somebody
I
else.
think the issue is not so much that does the individual have the skills that he can share with somebody, but it's that next step to get from the point of, this is what I can do, and I'm looking into the camera, and this is how you do this thing. How do you get it from the camera onto the YouTube and to an audience? Well, getting it onto YouTube is a little challenging, but it's a skill that even I can learn how to do. But the next step is, okay, it's on YouTube. How do I advertise it? How do I get the word out? How do I get money back? It's these
Right.
incremental steps that sound easy, but to somebody who's never done it before, it's a major
That's-
And they
challenge.
take time.
They take
to
time.
develop.
Yeah, that's sort of where more local or state-based infrastructure does come in and is often very useful. So community colleges, for instance, offer courses on business plan development, helping you in one semester of how do you, or even sort of in a compact few-week course, how do you develop a business plan? You have a business idea, how do you write it up? Like what it's going to cost you realistically? Where are you going to make the money? there are also courses and resources on that often community colleges deliver on how do you market this? How do you get an audience? Once you have it up on YouTube, what else do you need to do? Do you need to be on Twitter? Do you need to be on Facebook? How do you promote this? How do you make sure that you don't hurt your brand? And that's also where the states can come in, where states can say, like, okay, we're going to set up a business incubator at, let's say, an empty office building, an empty manufacturing building, where people in the community who want to start up their businesses can have a desk, an office-like situation for themselves, where they can meet others and sort of share and network around these ideas.
It sounds great. However, what's happening in the country is, for instance, take people from poor rural areas, coal miners, for instance. Now, the idea now is to get rid of coal, get rid of oil, get rid of gas. This is all coming mostly from the Democrat Party. What do you do with people who have been in the coal mines, working in the oil fields, whatever, who have been doing this for years? They're in their 50s, sometimes even 60s. What do you tell those people? Oh, we're going to retrain you to do this, this, and this? It's pie in the sky kind of stuff.
No, I think no, you're right.
How do you get, if you don't have, for instance, gasoline, and now, of course, with all this global warming business, oh, we have to get rid of the cars. How do you say to these people, well, you live here, you live in Beverly, you have to go to Springfield to participate in learning how to change your work, your profession. Well, I have no way to get there.
Right. No. I think the main point that we've learned over 30 years of debating this, especially around trade issues, is that, first of all, the economy is constantly changing. There's always changes happening from one industry to the next. We have not only upheaval now in oil and gas, we have upheaval in the financial service industry, companies merging. We now have upheaval in the healthcare industry, hospitals merging. So that requires us to build an infrastructure, a set of institutions that can help people use their skills. Like this whole notion of we're going to take a coal miner and we're going to retrain them to be a teacher or a coder or something else is often pie in the sky, because we're planning for something that may not fit their skill set at a higher level far away. So that doesn't work. So what we need to do is make sure that we understand that a coal miner, a car worker, an oil worker has actually a broad set of skills, in that they can bring that skill to other places. They don't, and ideally don't have to move. But if they have to move, there's ways of helping that too.
But isn't that putting the cart before the horse? Shouldn't these things be in place before you take away the coal, the oil, the gas, the cars, and not
right.
just say, in 12 years, the planet is going to be no longer
Right.
here because of climate change,
Well,
global warming, whatever you want to call it.
Well, on the coal side, we've been losing jobs for decades, and people are discussing the building the institutions at the same time, understanding that we are, as any capitalist economy is, incredibly dynamic, that there are shifts within industries. It is not coal. Like we're losing more jobs. Last year, we lost more jobs in like 2 or 3 months in retail than we lost over several years in coal. So we have incredibly dynamic industries, and that requires us to build community colleges, for instance, and apprenticeship programs that help people to build the skills early on if they want to have additional skills. But if they already have a lot of skills, then we need to make sure that people can bring those skills to the marketplace where the marketplace is. That doesn't require them to move from Beverly to Springfield or from Springfield to Beverly. The other part you touched on, and that is sort of a bigger issue that is much harder nut to crack, is age discrimination in the labor market. We do know that it still exists. We've been able to create a lot of job opportunities for older workers, 50, 55 and older, but not at fast enough rate. The reason why we're saying this is if you look at the data of how long a worker 55 and older is out of the labor market, it's still very, very high. So like a lot of older workers are looking for jobs, just can't find them. And we need to figure out how we change, especially in a state that is relatively old, like Massachusetts, how we change attitudes, how do we make sure that older workers who lose their job in their 50s and 60s can find reemployment and don't just linger on.
Okay, this has been great, but we've been giving the sign that time is almost up. We probably have about 2 minutes left. So would you like to kind of wrap up, and maybe we can have you back and we can get into discussions on healthcare and everything's free and all of this business. But,
Well, let's just be clear. Nothing is free when we spend money.
tell that to Bernie Sanders.
No, for economists, I believe even for Bernie Sanders, nothing is free, but not endorsing any particular candidate. The question is, how do we spend the money best? Like when we use government resources, they're limited, and we need to make sure that they're used most effectively in a way that boosts economic growth the best. We do know that that means infrastructure spending on education K through 12, and that means reducing income inequality. If we do that, we can ultimately have faster economic growth, more widely shared prosperity, and we can repay the debt that we're incurring today.
That's a big one, repaying the debt.
Managing the debt.
Managing. Okay. George, any final words?
Well, you touched on one of the issues about retraining older workers, and one of the things I want to bring up the next time we get together is, as people are living older, it's becoming very difficult to retire at an early age because of the economy, and people are going to have to stay in the labor force or in the workplace longer. So it gets to be a bigger problem than I think you're alluding to. It's just, how do I get to 65, but how do I get to 70 or 75 and still have a job? And you run into physical problems that, hey, I've been humping coal for the last 20 years. I ain't going to do that no more. Or some other physically demanding job.
Whatever.
Happy to have that conversation. I would just point out that Germany was a laggard when it came to employment options for older workers about 15, 20 years ago, and is now a leader. They changed a lot of things around to make it a lot more attractive for older workers to stay in the labor market and to be
That's a good place to start
hired.
next time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming, Chris.
Well, thank you very much for
We
having me
look
again.
forward to
Thank you
having
very
you
much,
again.
George.
And thank you all for watching. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. And we will see you probably in another week or so. Be sure to watch. Thank you.